The wrench slipped from Marcus Kane's oil-stained fingers as the proximity alarm screamed. Through Meridian Station's maintenance bay. He'd been elbow-deep in the hyperdrive assembly of a cargo hauler for the past 6 hours, and the sudden cacophony of warning signals made him bang his head against the engine housing. What the hell now? He muttered, rubbing the tender spot on his skull as he crawled out from under the massive ship. The bay's emergency lighting had kicked in, bathing everything in an ominous red glow that made the shadows dance across the cluttered workspace. Marcus had been the station's chief mechanic for 3 years now, ever since he'd burned out on military service and decided he preferred fixing things to breaking them. Meridian Station sat at the edge of human space, a lonely outpost that served as a refueling stop for traders, explorers, and the occasional military patrol. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and Marcus had grown to appreciate the solitude. The calm system crackled to life. "Marcus, we've got an unidentified vessel on approach Vector 7, came the voice of station controller Beth Martinez. "It's not responding to hails, and the trajectory is all wrong. Looks like it's going to hit the docking ring." Marcus wiped his hands on his coveralls and jogged toward the observation window. Through the reinforced transparistelle, he could see a sleek, unfamiliar craft tumbling end over end toward the station. Even from this distance, he could tell it was badly damaged. Hull breaches vented atmosphere in crystalline streams, and what looked like engine components trailed behind it, like a comet's tail. "Beth, that ship's not going to make a controlled docking," Marcus said into his comm unit. "It's coming in too fast and too steep. Can you extend the emergency capture nets?" "Already deploying them, Marcus. I need you in Bay 7 with a full trauma kit. If there's anyone alive on that thing, they're going to need immediate attention." Marcus's pulse quickened. Bay 7 was the largest docking facility on the station, designed to handle everything from massive cargo vessels to emergency rescues. He'd never seen a ship quite like the one approaching. Its hull was a peculiar silver-blue alloy that seemed to shift color in the light, and its design was all flowing curves where human ships were angular and practical. He grabbed his emergency medical kit and sprinted through the station's corridors, his heavy work boots echoing off the metal deck plating. Other station personnel were already at their emergency stations. Meridian only had a crew of 12, but they were all cross-trained for situations like this. The capture nets deployed just as Marcus reached Bay 7. Through the massive viewing portal, he watched the alien vessel slam into the electromagnetic webbing with bone-jarring force. The nets strained and groaned but held, gradually slowing the ship's tumble until it came to rest against the docking clamps. "Atmospheric scan shows the ship's cabin is depressurized." Beth's voice came through the bay speakers. "Whatever's inside has been breathing vacuum for a while." Marcus felt his heart sink. No human could survive exposure to hard vacuum for more than a few minutes. If this was a rescue mission, it was probably about to become a recovery operation. The docking tube extended and sealed against the alien ship's airlock. Marcus waited as the bay's atmospheric processors worked to establish a safe environment, then hit the cycling controls. The inner door hissed open, revealing a corridor unlike anything he'd ever seen. The ship's interior was organic in appearance, with walls that curved and flowed like the inside of a seashell. Bioluminescent panels provided a soft, pearl-like illumination that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. Marcus had worked on ships from a dozen different human manufacturers, but this was clearly the product of an entirely different technological philosophy. He followed the corridor toward what he assumed was the pilot's compartment, his footsteps muffled by a floor surface that felt almost alive beneath his boots. The ship's design reminded him of pictures he'd seen of deep-sea creatures, beautiful, alien, perfectly adapted to an environment humans could barely comprehend. The pilot's chamber was at the ship's heart, a spherical room with a chair that seemed grown rather than built, and slumped in that chair was a figure that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin had a subtle iridescent quality, shifting between pale blue and silver like moonlight on water. Her hair, if that's what it was, appeared to be composed of flowing, fiber-optic strands that still pulsed weakly with fading light. She was tall and graceful even in unconsciousness, wearing what looked like a form-fitting flight suit made from the same color-shifting material as her ship's hull. Marcus approached carefully, his medical scanner in hand. The device had been designed to work with human physiology, but it was detecting life signs faint but present. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and the scanner's readout showed several concerning anomalies. Unknown alien physiology detected, the scanner announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Recommend immediate consultation with xenobiology specialist. Yeah, well, the nearest xenobiology specialist is about 6 months away, Marcus muttered. He'd have to improvise. He gently checked her pulse, or what he hoped was her pulse. Her wrist felt delicate under his calloused fingers, and her skin was surprisingly warm despite the ship's depressurization. There was definitely a heartbeat, though it seemed slower than a human's and had an unusual rhythm. Her eyes opened suddenly, startling Marcus so badly that he nearly dropped his scanner. They were large and expressive, a deep violet color that seemed to hold flecks of starlight. For a moment, they stared at each other in mutual surprise. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak sound that his universal translator couldn't parse. Marcus realized she was probably suffering from decompression sickness, assuming her species was susceptible to such things. Easy, he said softly, using the same tone he might use to calm a frightened animal. You're safe now. You're on a human station. I'm going to help you. She seemed to understand something in his tone, if not his words. Her violet eyes studied his face with an intensity that made him self-conscious about his oil-stained coveralls and work-worn hands. Marcus activated his communate. Beth, I need you to contact the medical database and see if we have any information on unknown alien species, basic physiology, atmospheric requirements, anything that might help. Marcus, are you saying there's someone alive over there? Very much alive, he replied, watching as the alien pilot tried again to sit up. And I think she's hurt worse than she's letting on. The pilot's breathing became more labored, and Marcus noticed that the bioluminescent patterns in her hair were fading. Whatever powered those displays was clearly connected to her health, and the fact that they were dimming couldn't be good. He made a decision that would have horrified any proper medical professional. Working purely on instinct and his basic first aid training, Marcus began a careful examination of his patient. Her anatomy was similar enough to human that he could identify what seemed to be major organ locations, but different enough that he was essentially flying blind. She had what appeared to be a significant injury along her left side, some kind of impact wound that had sealed itself, but was clearly still causing problems. Marcus wished desperately for proper medical equipment, or at least a doctor who knew what they were doing. Instead, he had his mechanic's knowledge of how systems worked and failed, his basic medical training, and an increasingly strong desire to keep this beautiful, mysterious being alive. Beth, he called into his comm, I'm going to need you to clear the medical bay and set up a quarantine field. I'm bringing our guest over to the station. Marcus, are you sure that's safe? We don't know anything about her biology, her diseases. We don't know anything about her species medicine either, Marcus interrupted, carefully sliding his arms under the pilot's surprisingly light frame. But she's dying, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let that happen on my watch. As he lifted her, she made another soft sound, and her hand moved weakly to rest against his chest. The simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, not just the surprise of alien touch, but something deeper, a connection he couldn't explain. Her violet eyes met his again, and this time he was certain he saw gratitude there, and something else, something that suggested this rescue might be the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. Zara Voss had always believed that art was the universe's most honest language. Standing in her cluttered studio aboard Meridian Station, surrounded by half-finished holographic sculptures and light paintings that shifted with her emotions, she never imagined she'd be called upon to prove that theory. With someone's life hanging in the balance, the emergency summons had interrupted her work on a commission apiece celebrating the anniversary of humanity's first interstellar colony. Now, as she hurried through the station's corridors toward the medical bay, her portable holoprojector bouncing against her hip, Zara wondered what possible use an artist could be in a medical crisis. She's stable, but we can't communicate with her, Marcus explained as they stood outside the quarantine field. Through the transparent barrier, Zara could see the alien woman lying on the medical bed, her iridescent skin catching the room's lighting in mesmerizing patterns. Her translator seems to be damaged, and our universal systems can't parse her language. Beth thought maybe visual communication. Zara studied the patient with an artist's eye. The woman was undeniably beautiful, but it was her subtle movements that captured Zara's attention. Even unconscious, she seemed to respond to changes in light and color. The bioluminescent patterns in her hair, which Marcus had explained were some kind of biological display, pulsed more brightly when the room's illumination shifted toward blue wavelengths. She's photosensitive, Zara murmured. Look how her biolights respond to the ambient lighting. Marcus, can you adjust the room's spectrum to something warmer? As the lighting shifted to golden hues, the alien woman's breathing seemed to ease, and her biolights settled into a more regular pattern. Fascinating, Zara whispered. She activated her holoprojector and created a simple light sculpture, a gentle spiral of warm colors that rotated slowly in the air. The response was immediate. The woman's eyes opened, and the patterns in her hair brightened considerably. Marcus leaned closer to the barrier. She's responding to your art, not just responding, Zara said excitedly. Watch this, she modified the sculpture, adding complex geometric patterns that shifted and evolved. The alien woman sat up carefully, her violet eyes tracking every change in the display. Then something extraordinary happened. The woman raised her hand, and somehow through what appeared to be a form of bioelectric manipulation she began creating her own light patterns in the air. They were similar to Zara's holographic techniques, but far more organic, flowing like living things. She's an artist too, Zara breathed. The two women spent the next hour in silent conversation through light and color. Zara would create a pattern, and her alien counterpart would respond with variations or entirely new concepts. It was like watching the musicians jam together, each building on the other's themes. Gradually, Zara began to understand the emotional context behind the alien's light language. Sharp, angular patterns seemed to indicate distress or urgency. Flowing, circular motions suggested calm or pleasure. When Zara projected an image of Meridian Station, the woman responded with what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Warm, golden spirals that seemed to embrace the station's representation. I think her name is Lyrale, Zara announced to Marcus and the small crowd of station personnel who had gathered to watch. At least, that's the closest human approximation I can manage. She keeps creating this specific pattern when she points to herself. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's medical officer who had arrived from the outer system, frowned at her scanner readings. I've never seen anything like her physiology. She seems to photosynthesize to some degree, but she also requires traditional nutrition. And these biolights aren't just decorative, they're actually part of her nervous system. Marcus had barely left the medical base since bringing Lyrale aboard. Zara had noticed the way he looked at their patient with a mixture of protective concern and something deeper that he probably didn't recognize yet. She wants to show us something, Zara said, interpreting a new series of light patterns. Something about her ship. Lyrale created an urgent, pulsing display that seemed to indicate time was running out. Then she projected what looked like a star map, but with details no human chart had ever recorded. Those coordinates, Beth Martinez said, studying the display. They're deep in unexplored space. What could be out there? Lyrale's response was a complex light sculpture showing multiple ships' vessels with the same flowing, organic design as her own. But these ships were dark, their biolights dim or extinguished entirely. Her people, Zara whispered. Something's happened to her people. The revelation changed everything. What had started as a rescue mission was becoming something much larger. Lyrale wasn't just a lost pilot, she was potentially the only survivor of some kind of disaster that had befallen her entire species. Over the following days, Zara spent every free moment in the medical bay, working with Lyrale to refine their light language communication. The alien woman was a quick learner, and soon they were exchanging complex ideas and emotions through their artistic dialogue. Zara learned that Lyrale's people who called themselves the Velter, were indeed artists and scientists who had achieved a unique synthesis of biological and technological development. Their ships weren't just vessels, they were living partners, symbiotic organisms that bonded with their pilots on a cellular level. But something had gone wrong in their home system. Lirelay's light language became agitated when she tried to explain it, creating jagged, discordant patterns that hurt to look at. Dark shapes had come from the void between stars, beings that seemed to feed on light itself, leaving only cold darkness in their wake. "She's the only one who escaped," Zara translated, tears streaming down her face as she interpreted Lirelay's tragic light song. Her ship, her partner, used the last of its life force to get her to safety. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then we need to help her get home," Marcus, Beth warned. "We're talking about a journey into completely unexplored space. The nearest human fleet is months away, and we don't even know what we'd be facing." But Zara saw something in Lirelay's response to Marcus's words, explosion of hopeful colors, spiraling patterns that spoke of gratitude and something else, something that looked remarkably like the beginning of love. "She's not asking us to fight her battles," Zara said softly. "She's asking us to help her warn others, to prevent what happened to her people from spreading." Lirale created a new pattern, one that showed human ships alongside her own people's vessels, working together against the darkness. It was a beautiful vision, but also a desperate plea. "There's something else," Zara added, studying the subtle nuances in Lirelay's display. "She's not just grateful to Marcus for saving her life, I think she's falling in love with him." Marcus looked startled. "That's impossible. We're completely different species." But Lirelay's response was unmistakable, a cascade of warm, golden light that surrounded a representation of Marcus's image, patterns that spoke of admiration, attraction, and deepening affection. "Love doesn't recognize species barriers," Zara said gently. "I've seen it in her art every day. The way she lights up when you enter the room. The way her patterns become more complex and beautiful when she's trying to communicate with you. Specifically as if to prove the point." Lirale created her most elaborate display, yet a swirling galaxy of light in which to vary. Different stars orbited each other, their combined radiance illuminating everything around them. Marcus stared at the display, then at Lirale herself. When their eyes met, she smiled, an expression that translated perfectly across species lines, and her biolights pulsed with what could only be described as joy. "The question is," Zara said, "what are we going to do about it?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The station's long-range sensors detected multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. At the system's edge, human ships, moving fast and broadcasting military identification codes. "Looks like the cavalry's arrived," Beth announced. "Fifth Fleet Patrol Group, responding to our distress beacon." But when the fleet commander's image appeared on the main screen, his expression was grim. "Meridian Station, this is Admiral Chen. We've received disturbing reports from deep space monitoring stations. Something's been attacking our outer colonies, something that matches the description in your preliminary reports about your rescued alien." Zara felt her blood run cold through the quarantine barrier. She could see Lirelay's frantic light display urgent warnings that the darkness had followed her trail. "Admiral," Marcus said, stepping forward, "our guest isn't the threat. She's trying to warn us about it." "That remains to be determined," the Admiral replied coldly. "Prepare to transfer your alien prisoner to our custody for interrogation." "She's not a prisoner," Zara said firmly. "She's a refugee, and she's trying to help us." Lirelay's light song had become desperate now, showing images of human colonies going dark, of the creeping shadow that devoured light and life wherever it touched. But she also showed something else, a way to fight back, knowledge that her people had discovered too late. "We need to listen to her," Zara pleaded. "She has information that could save lives." But as the military ships closed in on Meridian Station, Zara realized that they were running out of time. The art that had brought two species together might not be enough to prevent the darkness from swallow. Finn Blackwood had always believed that language was the key to understanding the universe. As the youngest xenolinguistics specialist in the Human Colonial Authority, he'd spent years studying alien communication patterns, hoping for the day when humanity would make first contact. He never imagined that day would come with a fleet of warships bearing down on a remote station, and the fate of two civilizations hanging in the balance. The shuttle ride from the Fifth Fleet flagship to Meridian Station had been tense. Admiral Chen sat across from him, reviewing tactical reports with the cold efficiency of a career military officer. Beside Finn sat cultural attaché Elena Vasquez, a seasoned diplomat whose job would be to determine whether humanity was looking at a potential ally or a sophisticated enemy. "Remember, Dr. Blackwood," the Admiral said without looking up from his datapad, "your job is to establish basic communication protocols. Nothing more. Any intelligence gathered will be classified at the highest levels." Finn nodded, but his mind was already racing with possibilities. The preliminary reports from Meridian Station described a form of communication unlike anything in the xenolinguistic databases, a language of living light that conveyed not just meaning, but emotion and complex abstract concepts. As their shuttle docked with the station, Finn felt the familiar thrill that came with encountering something genuinely new. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but most of the alien artifacts humanity had discovered were dead relics from long extinct civilizations. The prospect of communicating with a living alien intelligence made his pulse quicken. Station Controller Martinez met them at the airlock, her expression carefully neutral. "Admiral, the alien, her name is Lyrale, is still in medical quarantine. Our artist, Zara Voss, has established a basic visual communication protocol." "Artist?" Admiral Chen frowned. "I requested a linguist." "With respect, sir," Martinez replied, "Ms. Voss has accomplished more in 3 days than our standard protocols might have achieved in weeks. The alien's language appears to be primarily visual and artistic in nature." Finn's interest sharpened. A purely artistic communication system would present unique challenges and opportunities. Most alien languages followed logical, mathematical patterns. A language based on aesthetic principles would require an entirely different approach. The medical bay was crowded when they arrived. Through the quarantine barrier, Finn got his first look at their visitor. Lyrale was even more striking than the reports had suggested, tall and graceful, with skin that shifted between pale blue and silver. But it was her hair that captured his attention. The fiber optic strands pulsed with complex patterns of light, creating what appeared to be a continuous stream of visual information. "She's beautiful," Elena whispered beside him. Marcus Kane, the mechanic who'd rescued Lyrale, was standing as close to the barrier as possible, watching the alien woman with obvious concern. Zara Voss sat cross-legged on the floor, her portable holoprojector creating intricate light sculptures that Lyrale responded to with her own bioluminescent displays. "Dr. Blackwood," Zara said without taking her eyes off her light conversation. "I've been trying to map the grammatical structures of her language. It's unlike anything I've encountered." Finn activated his own analysis equipment and began recording the exchange. Almost immediately, his computer systems began detecting patterns, not the linear structures typical of spoken languages, but complex, multi-dimensional arrays of meaning that operated on several levels simultaneously. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Her language appears to be holistic rather than sequential. Instead of words building into sentences, she's creating complete conceptual frameworks and then modifying them to convey additional information." Lyrale seemed to notice his analysis equipment. Her attention shifted from Zara to Finn, and she created a new pattern, a spiraling inquiry that somehow conveyed both curiosity and greeting. Finn felt a moment of vertigo as he realized she was asking him who he was, not just his name or profession, but his essential nature, his role in the complex social structure she was trying to understand. "She wants to know about you specifically," Zara translated. "In her culture, I think linguists hold a special position. They're bridges between different forms of understanding." Taking a deep breath, Finn activated his own holoprojector and attempted to create a simple response. His projection was crude compared to Lyrale's elegant displays, but it showed his function patterns of meaning flowing between different groups, creating connections where none had existed before. Lyrale's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Her biolights flared brighter, and she began creating the most complex display Finn had yet seen. It was a living model of information that showed not just concepts, but the relationships between concepts, the emotional context surrounding them, and their place in larger philosophical frameworks. My God, Finn breathed. She's not just communicating with us. She's trying to teach us how to think like her people. But as he watched, the display's tone shifted. Dark patterns began to intrude, jagged, consuming shapes that devoured the light around them. Liralay's expression became urgent, almost desperate. She's showing us what happened to her home system, Elena said, her voice tight with recognition. Something that feeds on light itself. Admiral Chen stepped forward. Can you ask her about military capabilities, numbers, weapons technology? Finn hesitated. The question felt crude, almost offensive in the context of Liralay's elegant communication style. But he attempted to project images of ships, weapons, tactical formations. Liralay's reaction was immediate and distressing. Her biolights dimmed significantly, and her response carried overtones of grief and horror that made everyone in the room step back. Instinctively, she's saying that's the wrong question, Zara interpreted. Military force isn't how you fight these things. They exist in a different, conceptual space. Physical weapons pass right through them. Then how do you fight them? Elena asked. Liralay's answer was complex beyond anything Finn had yet seen her attempt. She created overlapping layers of meaning that showed consciousness itself as a form of light, individual minds as points of radiance in a vast darkness. The shadow entities weren't just destroying physical matter, they were consuming the very concept of existence. But there's a way to resist them, Finn said, interpreting the deeper layers of her display. If enough conscious minds work together, if they share their light, they can create something too bright for the shadows to devour. You're talking about some kind of psychic warfare, Admiral Chen said skeptically. Not psychic, Finn corrected. Conceptual. These entities exist in the spaces between thoughts, in the void where meaning breaks down. But if multiple civilizations coordinate their understanding, create shared frameworks of reality, Liralay's confirmation was beautiful, a cascade of interconnected lights that showed different species, different ways of thinking, all contributing their unique perspectives to create something greater than the sum of its parts. She's asking us to help build a coalition, Elena realized. Not a military alliance, but something deeper, a joining of minds across species lines. As she's asking us to start with her, Marcus added quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The mechanic was still pressed against the quarantine barrier. But now Finn noticed that Liralay's attention was focused on him with particular intensity. She's been trying to form a bond with you, Finn said, understanding suddenly flooding through him. Not just romantic attraction, though that's part of it. Her people form deep mental connections with others. She wants to link her consciousness with yours. Is that safe? Elena asked. Finn studied the patterns Liralee was creating. I think she's offering to teach him her language directly. Mind to mind. It would create a permanent bridge between our species. Absolutely not, Admiral Chen said firmly. We're not experimenting with alien mind control on my watch. But Marcus was already moving toward the quarantine controls. It's not mind control, it's communication. And if these shadow things are coming for human space, we need to understand how to fight them. Marcus, don't, Zara said urgently. We don't know what kind of psychological effects. We don't have time to figure it out slowly. Marcus interrupted. She's dying, isn't she? That's what all those dimming biolights mean. Her ship was her symbiotic partner, and without it, she's slowly fading. Finn checked his readings and felt his heart sink. Marcus was right. Liralay's energy patterns were gradually decreasing. Without the biological support system her ship had provided, she was slowly burning out. There's more, Finn said grimly. According to her displays, she's not the only survivor. There are other Velter refugees scattered across the galaxy, but they're all in the same condition. If we can't establish proper contact, if we can't help them stabilize, an entire species could go extinct. Elena finished. Liralee seemed to understand their dilemma. She created a new pattern, one that showed the shadow entities spreading across the galaxy like a plague, consuming world after world. But it also showed points of light pushing back, different species working together to create bastions of coordinated consciousness. "She's showing us the future," Finn whispered. "Both possible futures, the one where the darkness wins, and the one where we learn to fight together." Marcus had his hand on the quarantine. Nova Chenreyes had been flying transport runs between the outer colonies for 6 years, and she'd always prided herself on keeping her cargo and passengers safe. But as she watched the cargo manifest for her latest assignment, she couldn't shake the feeling that this run would be different from all the others. Evacuation Priority Alpha, her flight coordinator had explained over the subspace comm. "New Thiesley colony is going dark. We're pulling out all non-essential personnel before whatever hit the Velter homeworld reaches them." Nova studied the passenger list on her datapad. 43 civilians, mostly scientists and their families who'd been studying the unusual mineral deposits in the New Thiesley system. The colony had been established only 2 years ago, far enough from the main shipping lanes to conduct their research in peace. Now that isolation might be the only thing that saved them. Her ship, the Wandering Star, wasn't built for passenger comfort. She was a sturdy cargo hauler with basic life support and enough shielding to survive most hazards of deep space travel. Nova had added her own modifications over the years, upgraded engines for speed, enhanced sensors for navigation, and a few defensive systems that weren't entirely legal in most systems. "Nova," came a voice from the passenger boarding ramp, "we've got a problem." She turned to see Dr. Elias Torrens, the colony's xenogeology team leader, helping an injured woman up the ramp. The woman was clearly not human. Her skin had the distinctive, iridescent quality of the Velter, and the fiber-optic strands of her hair pulsed weakly with fading light. "This is Kithera," Dr. Torrens explained. "She arrived at our colony 3 days ago in a damaged ship. She's been trying to warn us about something, but her translator was damaged in whatever happened to her vessel." Nova felt her pulse quicken. After the events at Meridian Station, word had spread quickly through the colonial networks about the Velter refugees and the shadow entities that had destroyed their civilization. But this was the first time she'd encountered one of the survivors. Personally, Kithra looked up at Nova with eyes that shifted between deep purple and silver, like amethyst caught in starlight. Even weakened and clearly in pain, she was breathtakingly beautiful. But it was the intelligence in her gaze that struck Nova most, an awareness that seemed to see not just her physical form, but something deeper. "Can she travel?" Nova asked, checking the life support readings on her wrist display. "I can adjust the atmospheric mix if needed." Dr. Torrens shook his head grimly. "That's just it. We don't think she should be moved. Her biosigns have been deteriorating since she arrived. Without her ship's symbiotic support systems, she's slowly dying." Nova studied Kithra's face, noting the way her bioluminescent hair patterns seemed to respond to the emotional currents in their conversation. "But if she stays, and these shadow things reach New Thiesley, she dies anyway," Dr. Torrens finished. "Along with the rest of us." The loading process took longer than Nova had hoped. The colonists were frightened, many of them reluctant to abandon years of research and the homes they'd built. Children cried as they were separated from pets that couldn't make the journey. Adults argued about what personal belongings they could bring in the limited cargo space. Through it all, Kithra sat in the ship's small medical bay, her attention focused on Nova with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. Whenever Nova passed through the compartment, Kithra would create small light displays with her hair patterns that conveyed emotions Nova was beginning to recognize even without formal translation. "She likes you," said Tomas Rivera, a young linguist who'd been studying Velter communication patterns since the Meridian Station incident. "The way her biolights pulse when you're around, it's the same pattern other refugees have shown. When they're forming emotional attachments." Nova paused in her pre-flight checks. "Emotional attachments. The Velter don't seem to distinguish between different types of love the way humans do," Tomas explained. "Romantic attraction, deep friendship, family bonds, they're all part of a spectrum of connection that they call light sharing. And Kithra definitely wants to share light with you." Before Nova could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming through the cockpit windows. She could see space itself beginning to darken around New Thiesley's star. It wasn't the gradual dimming of stellar evolution, it was something actively consuming the light. All passengers, strap in for immediate departure, Nova announced over the intercom. We're leaving now. The wandering star lifted off from New Thesely's surface just as the first tendrils of shadow reached the planet's outer atmosphere. Nova pushed the engines harder than she'd ever dared, racing against the spreading darkness that seemed to follow them like a living thing. Nova, Dr. Torrens called from the passenger compartment. Kithra's trying to tell us something important. Nova engaged the autopilot and rushed back to the medical bay. Kithra was creating the most complex light display Nova had yet seen, intricate patterns that showed star maps, flight trajectories, and what looked like safe zones scattered across the galaxy. She's showing us where the other refugee ships went, Tomas translated excitedly. And she knows which systems are still safe from the shadow entities. But as Nova watched, Kithra's display began to falter. Her biolights were growing dimmer, and her breathing had become labored. Whatever was keeping her alive was failing rapidly. We need to get her to a proper medical facility, Dr. Torrens said urgently. The closest human hospital is in the Kepler system, but that's a 3-day journey. Nova studied the star charts Kithra had created. According to the light patterns, there was a Velter refugee ship hidden in the asteroid fields of the Vanguard system only, 18 hours away at maximum speed. What if we don't take her to a human facility? Nova asked. What if we find her people? Kithra's response was immediate and emotional cascades of hopeful light that made everyone in the medical bay step back in amazement. But beneath the hope, Nova could see deeper currents of uncertainty and fear. She's afraid, Nova realized. She wants to see her people again, but she's terrified that we'll abandon her if she's no longer useful to us. The accusation in that fear hit Nova harder than she'd expected. How many times had human ships passed by alien vessels in distress because helping wasn't convenient or profitable? How many times had her own species chosen expedience over compassion? That's not going to happen, Nova said firmly, speaking directly to Kithra even though she knew the alien woman couldn't understand her words. We're going to find your people, and we're going to make sure you're safe. Kithra's biolights flared brighter, and she created a pattern that Nova was beginning to recognize as gratitude mixed with something deeper, a growing emotional connection that transcended language barriers. The journey to the Vanguard system became a race against time. Kithra's condition continued to deteriorate, and the ship's medical equipment could only provide basic life support. Nova found herself spending more and more time in the medical bay, talking to Kithra even though neither of them could understand the other's words. You know, Nova said during one of her visits, I've been flying solo runs for years because I thought it was easier than dealing with other people's problems. But watching you fight to stay alive, fight to save your people, it makes me want to be better than I am. Kithra created a soft, warm light display that somehow conveyed understanding and encouragement. Her hand moved weakly toward Nova, and when their fingers touched, Nova felt an unexpected jolt of connection, not physical, but something deeper. I think she's trying to bond with you, Tomas said quietly from the doorway, the way Marcus and Lyrale did at Meridian Station. But she's too weak to complete the process. Nova felt a chill of fear mixed with longing. The reports from Meridian Station had described the mental bonding between human and Velter as beautiful but irreversible. Once connected, both minds would be forever changed. Would it save her life? Nova asked. I don't know, Tomas admitted, but it might give her the strength to survive until we reach her people. The decision came sooner than Nova had expected. 18 hours into their journey, Kithra's biolights began to fade completely. Her breathing became shallow and irregular, and the ship's medical sensors detected multiple system failures. She's dying, Dr. Torrens said quietly. Nova looked down at Kithra's peaceful face, at the woman who had risked everything to warn strangers about an approaching darkness. In 3 days, this alien refugee had become more important to her than Nova would have thought possible. If I do this, Nova said, if I try to bond with her, what happens to both of us? According to the reports from Meridian Station, Tomas replied, you become something new, not human, not Velter, but something that bridges both species. Nova took Kithra's hand in both of hers. Will you monitor the process? Make sure we both survive it." Tomas nodded and activated his recording equipment. The other passengers gathered around the medical bay, creating an impromptu circle of witnesses for something unprecedented in human history. "I don't know if you can hear me," Nova whispered to Kithra, "but I'm willing to try this if you are. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you matter to me." Kithra's eyes opened one last time, and in them Nova saw not just gratitude, but love pure and unconditional and absolutely certain. Rowan Sterling had walked away from his military career, believing he'd seen enough war for several lifetimes. 3 years as a colonial peacekeeper had shown him that violence only created more violence, that the only lasting victories were won through understanding and compromise. Now, standing in the council chambers of Haven Station, humanity's newest diplomatic outpost, he faced a challenge that would test everything he'd learned about building bridges between enemies. The circular chamber was filled with representatives from 14 different species, their various atmospheric requirements creating a complex web of environmental barriers and translation fields. At the center of the room, a massive holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy, red zones marking systems already consumed by the shadow entities, yellow areas under threat, and the dwindling green spaces where coordinated resistance was holding the line. "The situation is deteriorating faster than our most pessimistic projections," announced Council Moderator Thane, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly as she spoke. "We've lost contact with 12 more systems in the past week alone." Rowan studied the faces or their equivalent around the chamber. Fear was universal, it seemed, regardless of how many eyes or tentacles a species possessed. But he also saw something else: hope. The bonds formed between humans and Vulture refugees had proven that the shadow entities could be resisted through deep mental connections between species. "The Human-Vulture Bonding Program has shown promising results," said Ambassador Keening, representing the aquatic Thesian Republic. "But the process requires willing participants and considerable time to complete. We need solutions that can be implemented on a larger scale." "What we need," rumbled General Korax of the Hegemony War Clans, "is a military response. These shadow entities may feed on consciousness, but they still occupy physical space. Enough firepower, conventional weapons are useless," interrupted Dr. Yenazal Threes, one of the Vulture refugees who had survived the initial attacks. Her bioluminescent hair pulsed with agitated patterns as she spoke through her translator. "My people tried everything: antimatter torpedoes, quantum disruptors, even stellar engineering. The shadows consumed it all." Rowan leaned forward in his chair. As the Council's senior human representative, his words would carry significant weight in the coming decisions. "Dr. Zalthries is correct about conventional weapons, but she's also identified our greatest strength. The bonding process doesn't just create personal connections. It creates shared consciousness networks that can coordinate across vast distances." "You're suggesting we turn the entire galaxy into some kind of hive mind?" General Korax's translator couldn't convey tone, but his body language suggested deep suspicion. "Not a hive mind," Rowan corrected. "A symphony, each species, each individual, contributing their unique perspective to a coordinated resistance. The shadows feed on isolation, on the spaces between minds. But if we can eliminate those spaces," he activated his personal display, showing data from the successful bonding experiments. Marcus and Lyrale at Meridian Station had demonstrated combat effectiveness far beyond either individual's capabilities. Nova and Kithra's merged consciousness had successfully navigated through shadow-infested space by thinking in ways neither human nor Vulture minds could achieve alone. "The preliminary results are encouraging," admitted Dr. Ravik, the Centauri Republic's chief xenopsychologist. "But we're talking about asking billions of beings to undergo irreversible mental alterations. The ethical implications alone, the ethical implications of extinction, are worse," Dr. Zalthries said quietly. Her biolights had shifted to somber blue patterns. "I have seen entire worlds go dark, not just death, complete erasure, as if they never existed at all. That is what awaits us if we cannot find another way." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Rowan could feel the weight of the moment, the understanding that they were making decisions that would shape the future of galactic civilization. "There might be another option," said a new voice from the chamber's observation gallery. Rowan turned to see Lyrale, the first Velter refugee rescued by humanity, approaching the speaker's podium. Her bond with Marcus had stabilized her condition, and the combined human-Velter perspective they now shared had made them invaluable advisors to the Council. "Marcus and I have been exploring the deeper implications of our bonding," Lyrale continued, her translator now able to convey the subtle emotional undertones of her speech. "We've discovered that our merged consciousness can sense other bonded pairs across interstellar distances. We believe it may be possible to create a voluntary network of consciousness without requiring universal participation." "Explain, moderator," Thane requested. "Think of it as a communication grid," Marcus said, joining Lyrale at the podium. The changes in him since the bonding were subtle, but noticeable. His movements had gained an unusual grace, and his eyes occasionally flickered with patterns that seemed almost Velter in nature. "Bonded pairs become nodes in a network that can coordinate resistance efforts across the galaxy. Instead of forcing everyone to bond, we create a volunteer corps of bridge minds." "How many pairs would be needed?" asked Ambassador Keening. "Our calculations suggest that one bonded pair per million population would be sufficient to maintain network coherence," Lyrale replied. "With 14 member species contributing, that would mean approximately 40,000 bonded pairs across the galaxy." General Corax's skepticism was evident in his posture. "And you expect 40,000 individuals to volunteer for irreversible mental alteration based on theoretical models?" "Actually," Rowan said, standing up, "I expect many more than that." All attention focused on him as he walked to the center of the chamber. "I've been reviewing the volunteer applications we've received since news of the bonding program spread. We've had over 2 million requests from humans alone, and similar numbers from other species. The desire to make this kind of connection, to become something greater than ourselves, it appears to be nearly universal." He paused, letting that information sink in. "The challenge isn't finding volunteers, it's determining compatibility, managing the bonding process safely, and coordinating the resulting network effectively." "You speak as if you have personal experience with the subject," observed Dr. Ravik. Rowan felt his pulse quicken. This was the moment he'd been both anticipating and dreading. "Because I do. Or rather, I will." The chamber erupted in surprised vocalizations from multiple species. Rowan raised his hand for quiet. "I've submitted my own application to undergo bonding with Velter refugee Sarai Velanun. The pairing was approved by the Xenop Psychology Board this morning, and the process is scheduled to begin after this session concludes." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the environmental systems seemed to quiet in response to the magnitude of what he'd revealed. "Rowan," moderator Thane said carefully, "you understand that as the senior human representative, your altered mental state could affect the Council's dynamic significantly." "I understand," Rowan replied. "I also understand that someone needs to take the first step. The bonding program needs visible leadership, proof that it's not just a desperate experiment, but a genuine evolution in how species can work together." General Corax leaned forward. "And if the process goes wrong, if you're killed or permanently incapacitated, then my successor will learn from the failure and do better," Rowan said simply. "But based on the successful bondings we've already witnessed, I believe the greater risk is in waiting while more worlds go dark." Dr. Zalthres created a pattern of lights that the translator rendered as profound gratitude. "You would risk everything for people not of your species. For people, period," Rowan corrected. "Consciousness is consciousness, regardless of what form it takes. If we can't recognize that fundamental truth, then maybe we don't deserve to survive what's coming." The vote, when it came, was closer than Rowan had hoped, but decisive enough to proceed. 9 species in favor of the expanded bonding program, for opposed, 1 abstention. It would be enough to begin coordinating a galaxy-wide resistance network. As the council session ended, Rowan felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. In a few hours, He would undergo a process that would fundamentally alter who he was, but he would also become part of something larger, a bridge between worlds, a living symbol of what different species could achieve together. Sarai Velanun was waiting for him in the bonding chamber, a specially designed space that could accommodate both human and Velter physiological needs. She was younger than the other refugees Rowan had met, her bioluminescent hair patterns quick and energetic despite the trauma she'd endured. "You are certain about this choice?" she asked through her translator, though her light patterns conveyed deeper currents of emotion, hope, fear, and something that might have been love. "I'm certain," Rowan replied, taking her hand. Her skin was warm and seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. "The question is whether you're ready to share your consciousness with a stubborn human diplomat." Sarai's laughter translated as cascades of silver light. "I think we will make something beautiful together." As the bonding process began, Rowan felt his individual consciousness expanding, merging with perspectives and experiences utterly unlike his own. He was